Chapter 53. I whistled through my teeth. Huh. That had worked much better than I'd anticipated. Honestly, I'd seen some pretty gnarly explosions during my time in Iraq and on demo sites scattered across the greater Kentuckian plains, but this was on a whole different level. The two monkey-filled purple barrels that Frank had hurled prior to the detonation had somehow survived the explosion. The remaining minions were picking themselves up off the hay-covered floor. Bellatrix and the others had also been far enough outside the blast radius to avoid taking any damage. The hulking bear with the horrific and all-too-human face was down below 50% now. She was bleeding from a legion of different wounds. Temperance danced and twirled around the lumbering creature like a manic pixie, hacking with her cleaver and bludgeoning with her bat. Croc had retreated from the front line, taking cover behind a sectional sofa while Jacob treated the mimic's injuries. A colossal roar pulled my attention away from the scene and back toward the blackened crater. It was hard to see anything thanks to the thick plume of smoke drifting up, but there was definitely something moving in there. I held my breath as the hulking form of Kong emerged from the curtain of black and gray. His health bar hadn't dropped by even a single percentage point, which wasn't much of a shock since the bassist was still alive. He hadn't come away completely unscathed, however, regardless of what his HP bar said. His black and silver fur had been almost entirely burned away, and smoldering ruined chunks of skin and meat hung from his thick frame. Frank threw his head back and issued another furious roar, rhythmically pounding at his chest with enormous fists. I stared on, completely dumbstruck, as the 30-odd reanimated murder monkeys turned away from me and swarmed the gorilla. They leapt on him en masse, and before long he was buried beneath a veritable sea of simian bodies. What the Kentucky fried fuck is going on here? Horror dawned on me as I saw the small army of monkeys begin to melt, their flesh turning into a gelatinous mess, which merged with Frank's own battered and broken body. The gorilla swelled in size. 9 feet, then 10. 12 feet. 15. Up and up he went, like Jack's beanstalk straining toward the heavens above. By the time the dark alchemy was finished, Frank stood at least 25 feet tall, his chest as big as a tractor-trailer, his arms like a pair of juvenile redwoods. His entire body was covered with bits and pieces of reanimated monkeys. Simian arms and twitching tails poked out, seemingly at random. Distorted monkey faces protruded from his shoulders, chest, and legs like cancerous growths. Uh-oh. Time to party. Fun time, Frank bellowed, his voice the sound of an industrial cement mixer. Then Frank and Kong charged me. He ran on all fours in a rolling, simian gait that ate up the ground at an incredible rate. Could use some help over here, I hollered, stealing a quick glance at the others. Bellatrix was missing an arm, and ropes of intestine and sparking wires drooped from a slash across her abdomen. Her health bar was strobing manically, warning, 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 but she still had a little gas left in the tank and she wasn't going down without a fight. We'll be there when we can, Jacob hollered back. Bellatrix exploited his moment of inattention and lunged forward, slamming a huge foot into the Syndrel's metallic shield. The kick knocked Jacob back at least 10 feet and left him gasping and wheezing on the floor. I turned back toward the charging Kong. I just needed to buy a little time here. That I could do. I pulled out my perpetual ace in the hole, the super slammer of shielding, spiked it on the floor, and intoned the arcane ritual words of old. Let's pog. The golden birdcage sprang up around me, and the 2-minute countdown timer appeared, tattooed on the air. Fun time. Frank skidded to a stop a handful of feet before the edge of the shimmering barrier and let out a roar of impotent rage, so loud it dropped me to one knee. The huge eldritch monkey horror raised a fist the size of a monster truck tire and brought it crashing down on the top of the dome. This dome had seen some nasty shit over the past several weeks, but for the first time the bars of light flickered and trembled beneath the force of the strike. It was just for a moment. A flash, here then gone. But suddenly I wasn't feeling quite as confident. Maybe Frank's rage wasn't quite as impotent as I'd first thought. I'd read the slammer item description more times than I could count and remembered the words with crystal clarity. The super slammer of shielding is a rare magical artifact, which summons a mostly impenetrable dome of arcane power, capable of protecting all those within the confines from physical, arcane, and elemental attacks. Mostly was the keyword there. Looked like Funtime Frank was going to put the resiliency of the shield to the test. Fists fell, one after another, like artillery blasts, the dome straining under the furious assault. The golden bars wavered and distorted. Cracking. The shield had only been in place for 15 seconds, and I had serious doubts that it would last another 15 seconds at this rate. I needed to do something to get Frankie boy to lay off, or he was going to crush this thing like a soda can with me trapped inside. My spells couldn't pass through the arcane dome, but physical objects could. I had a couple of actual Molotov cocktails left over from my fight with the Harmacist and also my speed square Batarang. Neither seemed like great options against a 25-foot-tall cyborg gorilla covered in the melted corpses of reanimated lab monkeys, but I just needed to buy time, not kill this fucker. I pulled my speed square from my belt, wound my arm back, and let her rip, aiming at the ape's face. My poor man's Batarang flew true and sunk all the way into one of Frank's fist-sized eyeballs. There was a sickly whip pop and the gorilla screeched, stumbling back as he groped at his face. Unfortunately, the speed square didn't come back because it was lodged in Frank's eyeball. Without missing a beat, I pulled out 3 run-of-the-mill Molotov cocktails, these all made from bottles of Jack Daniels and stuffed with greasy rags, soaked in lighter fluid. With nimble fingers, I pulled out a Zippo and lit the first bottle. The rag went up in a blaze and I fastballed the bottle of Jack at the staggering monkey before he could get his bearings. There was a crunch of broken glass followed by a great whoosh as the flames spread up Frank's stocky legs. I quickly lit the second and third bottles, throwing both in quick succession. The 2 bottles joined the first, one smashing against the ape's chest, the other splashing hungry flames across one arm. The ape howled, and a health bar appeared above its head. The bar turned from a burnt gold to a bloody red and dropped for the first time. The last active effect, bass boost, loitering beneath Frank's nameplate had finally disappeared, though Frank's level had also ticked up by 1. The Franken-Kong was now level 28. 1 level higher than the murder muncher from the arcade on the 3rd floor. Could we kill a level 28 blighted dweller the size of an office building? I had no clue. But we were gonna give it the good old college try. Alright. I yelled over one shoulder to the others. Let's wrap it and tap it. Croc was busy eating Bellatrix's head, but the others were already scrambling to get into their new protective gear. They were moving quick, but I still needed to buy them a little more time. I didn't want to trigger Stenslayer Maelstrom prematurely and I was hesitant to use pressure washer on the overgrown ape. The flames were doing a good job of distracting Frankie boy, and using water would only douse the inferno crawling across the creature's monstrous body. Time to do something stupid. With the golden protective shield still in place, I quickly swapped Bad Trip for a much more unstable relic. Burn, baby, burn. The uncommon, Flamethrower relic clicked into my spatial core and I felt chaotic power surge outward through my veins like a raging forest fire. Death and destruction sang inside me. Burn, baby, burn only cost 2 mana per second, an extremely cheap spell, and dealt a nasty 30 points of flame damage on contact, plus 5 additional points of fire damage per second. Sure, it would also deal 2 points a second of burn damage to me as well and there was a chance I could spontaneously explode, but so what? Now wasn't the time to play it safe. Now was the time to set shit on fire. I deactivated the Super Slammer, then squared my shoulders, thrust both hands forward, and unleashed a red-hot column of flame as thick as a telephone pole. My skin started to crackle and blaze in the same instant, terrible heat spreading backward up my hands and along my arms, scorching my chest and face in the process. My HP bar began to drop, and the pain consumed my world. It felt like touching a hot stove. But with my whole body, I didn't care. I just screamed and let the flames flow, because as much as they were hurting me, they were hurting Funtime Frank even more. I let the spell roar for a full 10 seconds, until Frank blazed like a Yule log and his health had finally dipped below 90%. My own health had plunged by nearly a quarter and my skin felt raw, like it had been stretched too tight across the muscle and bone beneath. While Frank raged and burned, I took a few seconds to spam mental micromanagement, starting and stopping the telekinetic flow in rapid succession like a burst of machine gun fire. It didn't take long until Wild Surge activated, quickly boosting my mana back up to 101. Unfortunately, the flames had started to die down, leaving burnt and blackened ruins in their wake. Funtime Frank wasn't looking like he was having a fun time at all. He looked pissed. The enormous ape opened its mouth and spit something wriggling and purple at me. The color drained from my face as I realized what it was. A writhing ball of monkey parts, all jumbled together. Arms and legs, tails and faces. I raised a hand and attempted to blast apart the incoming cannonball of fused lab monkeys, but the narrow beam of water just punched straight through. The ball of limbs and faces continued hurtling toward me undeterred. I took evasive actions, but my stupid boot caught on a piece of wooden shrapnel from one of the barrels. I stumbled and instinctively glanced down. It was only for a moment, but when I looked back up, the ball of monkey parts smashed into my stomach, knocking the air from my lungs. I doubled over, wheezing, and pitched onto my side, suddenly unable to breathe. The monkey ball didn't do much damage, but it did break apart on impact. Before I fully knew what was happening, a dozen or more severed monkey arms were somehow pinning me to the ground. Chapter 54. A lashing tail wrapped around my throat like a garrote, cutting off my already dwindling air supply. Seconds later, a decapitated monkey head rolled across the floor and latched onto my right bicep while another head bit down on my calf. I struggled to get up, to pry the grasping limbs from my body. They were strong and surprisingly nimble. It was like fighting an army of things from the Addams family. The bigger issue was the tail squeezing my neck like a boa constrictor. I reached up with my one free arm and tried fruitlessly to jam my fingers in between the tail and my neck. It was useless. My HP was steadily plunging. Cold, cruel realization washed over me. I'd come all this way just to get choked to death by a disembodied monkey tail. That was the biggest load of bullshit I'd ever heard in my life. Then I felt the tremendous thud of a colossal approaching footstep. Darkness was creeping in at the edges of my vision, but I still managed to catch a glimpse of Funtime Frank stomping toward me. The shadow of the creature stretched across me, and Frank raised his foot high. He was going to crush me like an insolent bug. Somehow, I wasn't sure if that was better or worse than getting choked out by a monkey tail. It seemed a little more dignifying, but only a little. I bucked and kicked, doing everything in my power to break the stranglehold of the grasping limbs, but they had me dead to rights. I braced myself, preparing for a quick and brutal end. A trio of ghostly blue chains erupted from the ground, wrapping around Frank and Kong's leg. Two more snared the creature around the throat, tugging tight as though Frank were a dog on a leash being brought to heel. Temperance's puritanical chains. The spectral chains started to pop and snap. They wouldn't be able to hold the creature at bay for long. But long enough. A pair of hands slipped beneath my armpits, roughly yanking me backward. Then Croc was in front of me, its jaws yawning wide. Fleshy blue tentacles pulled the simian limbs free like giant leeches, slurping them down. "You okay, Dan?" the dog asked as the last of the monkey parts vanished down its throat. "Glad to see you guys," I said. My voice was hoarse, and my throat felt raw. Bruised. Croc looked more or less the same as ever, but Temperance and Jacob had both donned rather curious attire over the top of their regular armor. Thick yellow rain jackets, with the hoods up. Heavy-duty rubber waders, looted from open sky outfitters, covered their legs and feet. Yellow, rubber-made cleaning gloves protected their hands, and black plastic bandanas covered their noses and mouths. Both had on a pair of thick safety goggles to safeguard their eyes. It looked for all the world like they were wearing makeshift hazmat suits, which wasn't far from the truth. "We all know what to do here," Jacob said. "I'll draw his attention. Temperance, you get close. Focus on tendons, wires, ankles. Break its mobility. Dan," he glanced toward me, "death from above. And what should I do?" Croc asked. "Keep Dan safe," Jacob replied solemnly. "None of this will mean anything if he dies." The Sindel turned on a heel and bolted away from us. As he ran, a terrible blaring siren emanated from his chest. Burr, 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 burr. It was the sound of a broken smoke detector, wailing at full blast. The racket was like nails on a chalkboard and made me irrationally angry and irritated for reasons I couldn't quite explain. That was one of Jacob's relics, I knew. It was literally called Faulty Smoke Detector, and its sole purpose was to draw and hold the attention of hostile dwellers. Annoying as fuck, and so loud it was impossible to ignore. It was the perfect aggro ability and it worked like a charm. The chains momentarily restraining Funtime Frank finally vanished. But instead of lumbering toward me or Temperance, the giant gorilla focused entirely on Jacob, hate and rage burning in the creature's eyes. Arcs of blue lightning flashed from the ends of Frank's fingertips, but Jacob easily absorbed the damage on his glowing shield. The monster was so thoroughly distracted, it didn't even notice as Temperance darted between its malformed feet. The killer furry immediately went to work with brutal efficiency, her meat cleaver carving deep, gruesome furrows in Frank's skin. Meanwhile, Croc's form shimmered. The mimic looked more or less like a bear. A bear drawn by a 4-year-old, sure, but a bear all the same. Before I could do anything, Croc lumbered over and scooped me up in its arms, then pulled me tight against its rubbery belly. Blue flesh crept over me, forming a giant baby holster. My arms and legs protruded from the bottom. "What the fuck are you doing?" I yelled, feebly kicking my legs. "Protecting you. You know what they say, Dan. Keep your friends close and your best friend in a baby Bjorn made of flesh. Besides, you can barely stand. So, I'll be the legs, and you just focus on spell casting." This was easily the most demeaning thing that had happened to me since clipping into the back rooms. Maybe the most demeaning thing to happen in my entire adult life. Almost being strangled to death by a rogue monkey tail didn't even come close. But, I had to admit it was surprisingly comfortable. "Fuck it," I said, shaking my head. "Let's baby Bjorn this bitch." Legs dangling down like an overgrown toddler, I activated Stainslayer Maelstrom for a second time, raining down corrosive death from above. Fat droplets of super bleach drenched Frank, melting through his fleshy exterior and dealing a devastating amount of damage while simultaneously eating through the monster's mana and stamina. The super bleach puddled on the ground, splashing onto Temperance, but between the waders and the raincoat, she was fine. More disgusting monkey balls peeled away from Frank's body, each one depleting a small portion of the creature's overall health, and rushed toward us. "Don't worry, Dan," Croc called. "I'll take care of them." The mimic surged into battle. Tentacles kept the monkey balls at bay and huge feet and hands crushed anything that got too close. I trusted Croc completely and focused all my effort on Frank. I let Pressure Washer rip at full blast, the lance of water cutting through the creature's hide even more effectively than Temperance's meat cleaver. At the same time, my hammer sailed through the air, held aloft by a strand of telekinetic force. I pumped extra mana into the weapon until it swelled to the size of a sledgehammer and burned with ghostly blue light. I brought the hammer screaming down in a wicked arc right into the side of Frank's hideously deformed face. The cooldown timer on Gavel of Get Fucked had reset, so I triggered the effect again, burning 20 stamina in the process. Frank was well above 60% health, so there was no chance Killing Blow would activate. But that didn't matter. The blow still landed for a total of 190 points of damage, knocking him down below 50%. Frank spun around, ignoring Jacob, and focused on me and Croc. The gorilla let out a thunderous roar and slammed a foot against the floor. A huge fissure zigzagged toward us, the attack identical to the one that Drumbo Chumbo had used earlier. Despite being the size of a bear, Croc was both fast and agile. The mimic easily danced away from the edge of the growing chasm while I continued to chip away at Frank's health, smashing him in the face with my hammer and spamming Pressure Washer, garnering additional stacks of water erosion with each passing second. Temperance had managed to climb onto Frank's back and was currently riding him like an angry rodeo bull and not a 25-foot-tall, reanimated cyborg gorilla. Her cleaver fell in rhythmic series of whack-whacks, each blow eating through a sliver of the creature's total HP. Burning green orbs of power shot from the gorilla's eyes, zipping toward us. There was a thunderclap off to the right as Jacob summoned what appeared to be a black hole. The swirling black vortex was about the size of a manhole cover and hung, unsupported, in the air. The green orbs immediately veered off course, sucked into the black hole. The black hole vanished with a pop and Jacob surged forward in a nimbus of golden light, his cowcatcher charge, at work. The Sindel raised his blue shield up, then brought the burning edge straight down, slicing through one of Frank's toes. The shield cauterized the wound in passing. Frank howled in rage and spun like a top, one giant foot mule kicking Jacob in the chest, launching the lizard man across the room. He landed in a boneless heap, his HP bar critically low. He wasn't dead, but unless I could spoon-feed him a healing elixir, it looked like he was out of the fight for the time being. Then, to make matters worse, Funtime Frank reared up and huge earthen spikes erupted from his back. An army of spears, all identical to the earthen spike that had impaled my foot. In an eye blink, he had transformed into a giant porcupine. And Temperance never saw it coming. Spike's pin-cushioned the murder bunny in half a dozen places. She tumbled off Frank's back and landed in a spreading puddle of red, blood hemorrhaging out at an astounding rate. She took a long, wheezing breath, her arms flopping weakly beside her. She was still alive, but for how much longer? Frank's HP was lingering just above 25%, and suddenly it was down to me and Croc. We needed to end this thing, and we needed to do it yesterday if we had any chance of saving our friends. There was a good chance it was already too late. What do we do, Dan? Croc yelled as he squashed another monkey ball with one foot, splattering bits of fur across the hay-covered floor. My mind raced but nothing was coming. My mana was low. I had enough juice to cast one more Stinslayer Maelstrom, but that wouldn't be enough. It might knock Frank below 20%, but then I'd be running on empty. I was sure I could get Wild Surge to proc again, but even if I did, so what? Every spell in my arsenal wouldn't be enough. It was too bad I'd destroyed all of his stupid barrels. If I had one of those explosive barrels, I could have lodged the damn thing in Frank's throat and turned his head into pink mist. I froze. Wait. That's the answer. Although I didn't have a barrel, I had something else in my inventory that might do the trick. We need to get him to face us. I bellowed. I just need a clear shot at his mouth. Before the words were even out, Croc was already on the move. The mimic raced around the circus ring, straddling environmental hazards and leaping over scurrying monkey balls. The mimic skidded to a halt a handful of feet in front of Jacob, still down for the count, then wheeled to face Frank, who was staring at us with hate etched into the lines of his deformed simian face. I raised a hand and activated pressure washer, this time aiming right at Frank's. Frank and beans. The blast of water hit for 15 points of slashing damage, which barely moved the needle on Frank's HP bar. But getting blasted in the junk by a stream of water with 90,000 psi of force behind it had to hurt like a bitch. Funtime Frank threw his head back and roared, which is when I acted. I reached through a jagged tear in the fabric of reality and pulled an artifact from my storage. It was small enough to fit into the palm of my hand. It wouldn't stay that way, though. I wrapped the object in a thread of telekinetic power and sent it flying with all the accuracy of a sniper round straight for Frank's yawning, cavernous mouth. The object glinted as it flew, flashing in the circus lights. It was a bright orange, die-cast, 1972 Ford Pinto. It looked like a Hot Wheel car. Chapter 55. As the die-cast Hot Wheels entered Frank's gaping maw, I yelled, "It's cruising time, you no good monkey fucker." And the car enlarged to its full size. At 25 feet, Frank was one big old chunky monkey. But his mouth wasn't large enough to contain a full-sized sedan. Not even a subcompact two-seater like the Pinto. Frank's head just exploded as the car reached its full size. Blood, bone, and bits of metal flew out in a geyser as Frank's body toppled to the side, landing with a thud. the twisted remains of Pinto right on top. And just like that, Funtime Frank was dead. So was my car, an unfortunate casualty of war, though the heap of motorized shit had served me well. With Frank and Kong and the rest of the jamboree dead, the metal dome walling us in retracted and disappeared back beneath the debris and gore-splattered floor. We'd done it. Against all odds, we'd won. Beaten the monster at the heart of this place and purged the blight while doing it, though we weren't completely out of the woods yet. Temperance and Jacob were both in terrible shape, though Temperance had taken the worst of the punishment. Frank's spike attack had turned her into a furry pincushion. Right hand to God, it looked like someone had cut her down with a machine gun. Puncture wounds and lacerations dotted her body, and a great pool of blood was already congealing in a crimson halo by the time Croc and I got to her. By all rights, she should have been dead. I legitimately couldn't understand how she had survived at all. Turned out she wouldn't have, if not for Jacob. Unbeknownst to me, the Central had equipped the insurance-packed relic I'd given him back at the mart. The same insurance pact I'd received from the corpse of Natasha Anno, aspirant of the Skinless Court. The uncommon great ability enabled the caster to form an insurance pact with an ally, sharing up to 20% of their max health pool with the other for 10 minutes. Jacob had formed the bond with Temperance early on during the fight, an act which had saved her life without a shadow of a doubt. It was also the residual trauma from the pact that had knocked Jacob out cold and not getting mule-kicked in the chest by Frank, as I'd first assumed. The pact didn't just share the HP pool, it also shared the pain both parties suffered while the ability was active. It was a nasty side effect, though again, without it Temp would have died. A few Zima health elixirs, and a little extra TLC, courtesy of pharmacist Scales, saw both the Delvers back on their feet and good as new. Mostly. Temperance's protective raincoat and rubber waders had been shredded beyond recognition. The items weren't artifacts, which meant they wouldn't naturally recover over time. It was a small loss in the grand scheme of things, and nothing that couldn't be replaced with a few quick raids. Once I was sure my friends weren't going to die, I took a minute to wade through the sea of notifications that had rolled in like the high tide. There were a lot of them, which came as a shock to no one. Level up. X2 Research Achievement Unlocked. Research Achievement Unlocked. Research Achievement Unlocked. I'd earned a broad swath of new achievements for a wide range of insane and borderline suicidal behavior. Friendly fire for redirecting one of Frank's magical barrels directly into Drumbo Chumbo. Hit and run for using a vehicle to murder an arcade boss. Or third, called Barrel of Monkeys, for slaughtering more than 50 reanimated lab monkeys at once. I even earned one called Flame On, for setting myself on fire with my own relic. I wasn't sure if I was the most or least proud of that particular research achievement, though it did come with a silver firebrand loot token, which was a nice touch. The fifth and final achievement was for clearing the Jungle Gym Jamboree bounty. It came with enough loot and prizes to make all of the horrible, extremely traumatizing events of the past hour almost worth it. It also came with a new title, though I wasn't in love with the name. Monkey Fucker. Slap my ass and call me a monkey's uncle. You did it, you crazy son of a bitch. You killed Funtime Frank and cleansed the Jungle Gym Jamboree of the encroaching blight. Huzzah. And you didn't just kill him, you really fucked his shit up good. Using a Ford Pinto to explode his skull? Absolutely insane and a stroke of genius. But also, the work of a true master murderer. This kind of raw chutzpah deserves a round of applause and enough loot to fill a bathtub. Reward, 3,500 experience. 10x Copper Delver Loot Tokens, 3x Silver Delver Loot Tokens, 1x Silver Gambler Loot Token, 1x Sapphire Binder Loot Token, 1x Golden Kiosk Franchise Opportunity. Title, Monkey Fucker, deal 15% additional damage to opponents more than 10 levels higher than you. Interestingly, another prompt appeared beneath the new achievement. Synergistic resonance detected. You have 2 active titles with extreme synergy. Would you like to forge out of your league and Monkey Fucker into a new title? Asterisk. Yes, no? I hadn't realized that titles even could be combined like relics. Croc had never mentioned the possibility, although it was likely that Croc didn't know either. The one steadfast truth I'd learned about the backrooms was that no one knew everything. Hell, no one knew most things. And even the stuff they thought they knew was probably wrong. There was an asterisk next to the prompt, letting me know I could run an analysis of the new title using the researcher's codex. Because I wasn't an idiot, I hit yes and read over a rather dry but thorough report of the derivative title. The two titles basically did the same thing already, so combining them made sense for a variety of reasons. First, the effects wouldn't stack separately, which meant I'd be wasting a title slot. Second, the two titles were far better together than they were apart. And last, but certainly not least, I wouldn't get stuck with a title called Monkey Fucker. That alone was enough of a selling point to persuade me to hit yes. I accepted and gleefully read over my new title. New title forged, Punch-Out. Champion, when facing an enemy 5+ levels higher than you, all damage you deal is magnified by 3n%, where n is equal to the level difference between you and your opponent. I cackled like a maniac, earning curious and concerned glances from the others. I didn't care what they thought. Even with a bit of quick and dirty mental math, that meant I'd deal 15% additional damage to anyone 5 levels higher than me, and 30% more damage to someone 10 levels higher. The Flayed Monarch was at least level 100, so did that mean I'd be able to score 300% damage against him? Probably. Though even that might not be enough to put a dent in the monster's health pool. Unfortunately, that wasn't the only title that had changed. Listed just below Punch-Out. Champion was my fish-in-a-barrel title. It had also evolved without my consent, just like Jacob had said it would. Perfect. Title, Barracuda in a Barrel. You exude an aura of pure carnage. Dwellers more than 10 levels below you will actively avoid you, and slaying any dweller below level 10 grants no experience. This is an evolving title. This title cannot be unequipped. Is the little Wababy sad because they can't murder dwellers too weak to fight back? Well, cry me a river, you murder hobo, because I don't give a shit. It took us another hour after that to mop up the scene and loot the corpses. Although the reanimated monkeys didn't have any relics of their own, each had at least one common grade shard apiece. We walked away with 97 shards in total. Even split 3 ways, it was a fantastic haul for half an hour's worth of work. Then there were the relics. Each of Funtime Frank's badly taxidermied bandmates had at least 2, Beatrix the bass-playing Nightmare Bear had 3, while Frank and Kong himself had 4. That gave us 13 in all. Split 4 ways, that was 3 apiece, though Croc didn't want to share. As a dweller, the Mimic didn't use relics in the same way we did. All the dog wanted was the leftovers, a phrase and notion I had no desire, whatsoever, to investigate further. After a little haggling, Jacob and Temp ended up with 4 relics each, while I got 5 since I'd been the one to land the killing blow against Frank. The fact that the Pinto was trashed beyond repair also factored in. Artifacts like that didn't come along all that often, and scoring an extra relic seemed like a fair exchange. Deciding which relics to pick was a tough call because they were all amazing, each in its own unique way. Melodic Wall conjured a mana-frequency shield, capable of dispelling spells on contact, while Thick Fat boosted toughness and soaked up physical damage like a sponge. Adaptive Immunity was a particularly interesting relic that offered a unique form of resistance immunity. When activated, the caster developed 50% resistance to the last type of damage they received for 10 minutes. Like I said, they were impressive skills, some magical in nature, others physical, but most I passed over for a variety of reasons. In my opinion, Melodic Wall was a shittier version of Sterilization Field, and I already had a powerful toughness-boosting relic in the form of Baldree's Scale Mailkairas. Things like Adaptive Immunity or Thick Fat made far more sense for a close combat tank like Jacob. There were a couple of ranged offensive spells as well, Harmonic Blade and Synthwave Shock, but neither was quite as good as Pressure Washer. Ultimately, I picked a more eclectic assortment of relics. Not quite as traditionally straightforward, but useful in different ways. The first was a bizarre rare great relic called Unhinged Taxidermist. It was the same ability Frank had used to summon barrels overflowing with reanimated lab monkeys. Monkeys who had almost torn me limb from limb, I might add. It was a summoner relic that worked in a similar fashion to my cannon fodder minion ability, though with a few slight differences. As with cannon fodder minion, I couldn't just conjure prefab minions from thin air. Instead, I needed to build them. The difference was, I couldn't use random garbage. I needed corpses. Corpses and machines. In true Dr. Frankenstein fashion, I could play with the powers of creation to smash together machine and flesh, forging unholy abominations not fit for the eyes of mankind. Pretty badass, honestly. Unhinged Taxidermist. Rare relic, level 1. Cost, 50 mana. Cast time, 10 minutes. Material components, 1x corpse, 1x relic. Common grade or better. Mechanics. Ever wanted to play God with a wrench and some spare monster parts? Well, now you can. Who needs friends when you can stitch together the leftover chunks of yesterday's enemies with whatever scrap metal you have lying around? Not you, which is good, because people will actively avoid you when they see your grotesque entourage of taxidermid horrors. You may create up to 2 minions for every relic level. Once forged, your minions can be summoned or banished to an extra-dimensional subspace container at will. If destroyed, vanquished minions will be instantly returned to their subspace container, and once repaired, they can be redeployed. Each horror's stats and capabilities will vary wildly based on the quality of components used. This relic enables mana usage and comes with a complimentary tetanus shot. Reading over the description, I realized it was distinctly possible that Frank's bandmates had been human, once upon a time. Nowhere in the relic description did it say the corpses had to be from dwellers. It was impossible not to picture Cynthia Lynx with her feline face, mangy electric blue fur, and the crude stitches crisscrossing her body. I couldn't get the thought of Drumbo Chumbo out of my head. Their eyes, strangely human and frozen in terror, would haunt my nightmares for years to come, assuming I made it that long, which was no sure thing. Not here. It was a fucked up skill, without a doubt, but it was also powerful. And I needed power. So, as gross as it was, I took Unhinged Taxidermist for myself and then harvested what remained of the band to my subspace storage system. The maximum weight allowance was only 2,000 pounds, which meant I needed to be picky. I would have loved to scoop up what was left of Frank in a bucket and haul him back with me, but the big ol' son of a bitch was 4,000 or 5,000 pounds easy. With a little help from Croc and Temperance, I collected the serviceable bits and pieces from the rest of the slaughtered bandmates. Arms and legs. Animatronic innards. Vex Vixen's head was entirely gone, but the rest of her was mostly intact and Cynthia Lynx was almost entirely in one piece. I also reclaimed whatever I could from the Pinto. It would never function as a motor vehicle again, but maybe with a little tinkering and elbow grease it would get a second life as a minion. When I was done salvaging what I could, Croc finished what was left. The next relic, another rare, also came from Frank and seemed to be part of a paired set with Unhinged Taxidermist. As twisted as the first relic had been, the second was arguably worse. Much worse. Form Fleshtron, Go. Allowed the caster to temporarily absorb all summoned taxidermid horrors, transforming them into a mech of meat and metal with the caster piloting the unholy abomination from the inside. Like Voltron but worse. That had to be the ability Frank had used during the finale of the battle. The one that let him suck up the scattered reanimated lab monkeys like a shop vac and transform into a kidju of fur and fangs. The cost of using the relic was extremely high. Prohibitively so. It had a 30-second cast time, a 120 mana cost, and a 48-hour cooldown period. Worst of all, once the spell guttered and died, I wouldn't be able to summon any minions at all for a full day. Obviously, it wasn't the kind of thing that I'd want to have equipped regularly, but it would make one hell of a ace in the hole if things ever went truly sideways. In the backrooms that wasn't a question of if, it was a question of when. I tucked that one away for later. Fault Spike was an uncommon I'd looted off Drumbo Chumbo. Fault Spike. Uncommon Relic, Level 1. Range, Line of Sight. Cost, 5-50 mana. Cast time, 2 seconds. Duration, Permanent terrain alteration. Taking the phrase "get fucked" to a whole new level, Fault Spike summons between 1 and 10 razor-sharp earthen shafts capable of spit roasting your enemies like a luau pig. Because luau pig is definitely what you were thinking when I said spit roast. Fault Spikes are considered permanent terrain alterations and will stay put until the backrooms decides to undo your handiwork, so don't place them anywhere you don't want them long-term. Each spike deals 25 points of piercing damage on contact and the target is afflicted with 1 stack of uncontrollable hemorrhaging, dealing 2 points of bleed damage for each second they are impaled. Another stack of uncontrollable hemorrhaging is applied every 5 seconds. If 5 stacks of uncontrollable hemorrhaging accumulate, the target suffers earthbarb and any attempts to remove the spear deals an additional 25 points of tearing damage. This relic enables mana usage. I'd personally been on the receiving end of that particular technique, and Frank had used it to turn Temperance into a bona fide pincushion. It was a nasty hour spell, which also had some solid crowd control potential, one area where I was sorely lacking. It also happened to resonate with my pressure washer skill. In theory, the two items could be forged, though when I used Codex Analytics, I was less than impressed with the overall result. The two skills only had a 20% compatibility rating, which meant there was no telling what I'd end up with. Hard pass. Frequency Modulator, on the other hand, I snagged specifically because it resonated with 2 of my other active relics. On its own, Frequency Modulator let the caster shift vibrational frequency for 5 seconds, making them semi-intangible and 95% resistant to all forms of physical damage. It was a damn good ability all on its own. When combined with Mall Ninja's strike and moving workway, however, the net result was mind-blowing. When forged, the 3 relics created my second Fable Great Relic, Neural Slipstream. At its core, Mall Ninja's strike was a camouflage spell with an added sneak attack damage buff, while moving walkway was the backrooms version of a basic ace spell. Neural Slipstream took the best parts of all 3 abilities and merged them into a single, powerful effect. When triggered, it transformed me into a being of pure thought. At level 1, it made me both invisible and intangible for up to 5 seconds. No one would be able to see me, and while intangible, I was 90% resistant to all forms of damage, both melee and magical, though telepathic and psychic damage increased by 50%. On top of that, I'd be able to move like the wind and phase through physical objects and terrain hazards. Basically, the damn thing turned me into an avenging specter capable of tearing across the battlefield and dodging even the deadliest attacks. With a thought, I'd be able to effortlessly close the gap with my enemies or gain some breathing room, depending on the circumstance. It cost 25 mana to cast and had a 30-second cooldown, but that was nothing. The single biggest drawback was that I couldn't deal any damage while in spectral thought form. Still, for 5 seconds, I'd be a ghost. And I'd be the next best thing to invincible. As good as the other relics were, the last was the one I was most excited for, even though it was only an uncommon. I'd finally earned my first trap relic, something I'd been actively hunting for ever since my battle for the mediocre mart. As I read over the relic description, I cackled with feral glee. Runic Resonance Trap. Uncommon Relic, Level 1. Range, on contact. Cost, 15 mana. Cast time, 20 seconds. Duration, until activated. Material component, 1x Runic Engraver's All Artifact, 1x Compatible Surface. If you've been in the backrooms for longer than 2 minutes, you've likely stumbled across, or been irreparably maimed by, one of these bad boys. This is the most versatile of the 3 basic bitch backroom traps, runes, tripwires, and pitfalls. Nothing fancy, but it'll get the job done. Some moron blunders along and bam. It's raining men. Well, pieces of men, anyway. Or women. Or monsters. Or you. This thing doesn't discriminate. Use a trap missile to inscribe an invisible conductor rune onto any compatible material surface and image said rune with a mana-based effect. You must cast the spell to store it. All mana spell costs remain the same, but the stored spell effect is reduced by 50%. That's called mana leakage for you technical sorts. How much mana any given rune can contain depends upon the relic level. This relic enables mana usage. Learning how to effectively use the new relic would take some time, patience, and practice, but once I did, nothing would be safe. Not a single damned thing. Flayed monarch included. Epilogue prizes in hand and exhausted to the bone, the four of us slowly navigated our way out of the colossal loot arcade. Thankfully, leaving ended up being significantly easier than getting in. One enormous slide, completely free of traps, tripwires, and monsters, deposited us back near the very front of the arcade. There weren't even ball pit berries waiting for us with vicious insults at the bottom. Croc was like a little kid on Christmas morning, over the moon by the sheer thrill of the ride. Temperance was understandably eager to get back to Howler's Hold, but I wasn't quite ready to jump in with both feet. Not just yet. I'd leveled up twice, thanks to Frank and his merry band of psychos, and had personal enhancement points to burn. I wasn't just going to sit on those points, especially since we were stepping into unknown territory. Jacob and Temperance had both saved my ass more than once, and though I trusted them, that trust wasn't ironclad. Like Croc said time and again, assume that everything, everywhere, all the time is both lying to you and trying to kill you. Temp was fun but clearly unstable, and I got the sense that Jacob was still keeping things from me, though what exactly, I wasn't sure. True, both were friends and, sure, both said the Howlers could be trusted and were generally welcoming to outsiders, but with so many enemies gunning for me, it paid to be cautious. Maybe the Howlers would welcome me with open arms, or maybe they'd been infiltrated by the Skillless Court and were just waiting for a chance to turn me into meat paste. Maybe I was being a little paranoid. But was it actually paranoia if someone really was out to get me? Or was it just being smart? I wasn't sure, but either way, playing things close to the vest had kept me alive so far, and I figured the age-old axiom if it ain't broke, don't fix it probably applied to this situation. Besides, it would be better to meet the Howlers on my own turf, assuming I could swing it. At level 22, I had access to a grand total of 11 doorway anchors, not counting my personal VIP doorway, and I'd only planted 9 so far. 3 in the lobby, 1 on the first floor, 2 on the third, and 1 more apiece on the 4th, 5th, and 7th floors. I hadn't planted 1 on 6, because it wasn't technically a level at all, and I'd also purposely avoided putting 1 on the 2nd floor, the devil's asshole, because fuck that whole, inhospitable level on general principle. No one willingly visited the 2nd floor, and anyone unlucky enough to wind up there was probably already dead. Planting a door there would be like adding extra deck chairs to the Titanic, pointless. But with 3 additional anchors at my disposal, I could afford to plant 1 here. It was both close to the loot arcade and in the same sector as Howler's Hold, which meant that even if the floor shifted, we'd still be able to make it to the hold without much trouble, and vice versa. Long term, I wanted to place 1 smack dab inside the hold itself, but this would work for now. And now was all that mattered. All that other shit, the Howlers, the Monarch, the Syndicate, were worries for tomorrow. I took a deep breath and felt a palpable weight lift off my shoulders as we stepped through the freshly planted door and into the heart of my own personal paradise. I spotted baby hands mopping up a spill in the condiment aisle and heard an ear-splitting goat-like squeal, which could only belong to Princess Poonie Puff. Instead of being annoyed, I found myself grinning from ear to ear like a diffuse. Seeing this place again felt like coming home, which was a genuinely surreal experience. A little more than a month ago, I'd woken up with the worst hangover of my life, certain I was going to get disemboweled by an eldritch horror from the deepest reaches of hell. I'd never wanted to go home more. Now I wasn't sure I ever wanted to leave. Were the backrooms a living nightmare? Yeah, obviously. Could they kill you in a heartbeat? Without a doubt. But as I looked at my friends and at the strange kingdom I'd painstakingly carved out for myself, I realized I was happier than I'd been in a long time. Maybe happier than I'd ever been. I had purpose, camaraderie, adventure. All the free beer I could ask for. What more could a guy want? Plus, I was building something here. Something important. Something worth fighting for. Maybe even something worth dying for. There was no doubt this was a truly fucked up place, but we were doing our part to unfuck it and helping a lot of people in the process. We'd already saved dozens of lives, maybe more, and by the time we were through it could be hundreds or even thousands. If things went according to plan, we might even have a chance to kill that cockwomble who lived on the 999th floor. That had to be worth something. But again, those were worries for tomorrow. For future me. All present me wanted to do was celebrate with friends, and we had every reason to. Against all odds, we had not only killed Frank and his crew, we had made out like bandits and did it all without losing anyone. If that wasn't a good enough reason to get blackout drunk and badly sing karaoke, there'd never be one. I made my way to the front of the store and clambered onto the checkout counter. "Attention, shoppers!" I called out, cupping one hand around my mouth. "This is your friendly neighborhood shopkeeper, Discount Dan." The store fell quiet, and an unsettling pressure seeped into the air like an angry storm cloud taking shape. It was fear. I could see it in their faces and read it in their eyes. Fear of the unknown. Fear of starvation. Of death. Of me. Every inch of the back rooms was stained with fear, but this place could be different. This was a place built on hope. "I know we're all far from home," I continued, scanning each of the faces staring up at me. "Scared out of our minds, wondering if we'll ever see our friends or our families again. Wondering whether we'll live to see another day at all. I wish I had answers for you, but I don't. Truth is, we might all die, ripped apart, bludgeoned to death, or skinned alive. But not tonight. Not right now. Right now, we're alive, we're safe, and we're together. We all come from different places and backgrounds. Some of us don't even speak the same language, and some of us dress up in animal costumes for reasons I'll probably never understand." I glanced pointedly at Temperance in her skin-tight bunny suit. "But none of it matters. What matters is that we're a community, and tonight we're gonna celebrate like one." I reached through space-time and pulled out a frosty beer. I cracked the top with one nimble finger, then hoisted the can into the air. "Tonight, we drink. Tonight, we celebrate. Tonight, beer and pizza are on me." The end of Discount Dan, Book 1.